everyone, welcome back to Brush and Bubbles and a very Merry Christmas. So I hope that you're all excited to paint with me today, because what we're going to do today doesn't just work on a canvas, it can also work if you're making some homemade Christmas cards. So if you want to go down the Christmas card route, I would just make sure that you've got some card available. I've actually just used some watercolour card that I have to paint with, and I've just folded it in half. So if you want to stick with your art canvas today, then that's absolutely fine as well, because I'll be showing you the design on the canvas. But if you wanted to create them into cards, then you can just follow the same design, but pop them on your cards instead. So before we jump into our painting, I'm just going to talk you through what you'll need to create this at home. Like always, I would start by covering up your table with some tablecloth or old newspaper. You'll need a canvas, or you'll need some blank card so you can make your homemade Christmas cards. You'll need a couple of different size brushes. I've got a medium square shaped brush and a smaller pointy one. You'll also need a pencil and a ruler. You'll then need some kitchen towel, a pot of water, a palette to put all of your paints in, and your acrylic paints. Once we get started, I'll be showing you which paint colours I'm using for my painting, but like always, please feel free to change up your colours. You can do anything that you want. Just make sure that you're lovely and comfortable, you're set up, pop the Christmas tunes on, go get yourself a nice drink, and then we'll get started with our Christmas themed painting. In my paint palette, I have white, blue, a dark green, lighter green, yellow, a yellow green, some red and black paint. I've got here my folded up pieces of card, so you can do these any size that you want, and we're just going to paint our design on the front. For this tutorial, I'm actually going to show you the design on a canvas, because you can also paint this on a canvas and it's quite nice to give to someone as a gift, or you can bring it out every Christmas time. So whatever I'm doing on here, you can simply copy onto your cards if you want to, and you can also change them up so that each one is a little bit different. The first thing we want to do is just draw in where we want our border to be. So you might want a complete border, or you might want a broken border, so you could have an L-like shape down here and then another one at the top. So just taking a ruler, just decide where you want it to be, and we're just going to carefully draw it in with a pencil. So what I like to do is just use almost the width of the ruler, depending how big your ruler is, to sort of help me get the shape in there. I'm just going to bring it down to about there, and then I'm going to do the same on the bottom as well. So I'm just going to use the width of the ruler and just do another line, so we've got a sort of L-like shape there, and then our sort of foliage will come off of that shape. I'm now just going to do exactly the same thing up here on the top right hand side. So I wouldn't worry about these lines too much, because we are going to be painting over them. If you're doing this design on a canvas like I am here, we're going to paint the whole background of our canvas white. So we're actually going to go over these pencil lines that we've just made, but we should still be able to see them through the white paint. If, however, you are doing your design on your piece of card, then you can miss out this next step. We don't need to paint the background of our card white if you don't want to. It's just so that we can prime our canvas. So taking my medium brush, I'm just going to dip it in the water just to loosen up the bristles, and then picking up some white paint, I'm just going to start painting the whole of the background of my canvas with this white paint. I'm just going to use up and down swipes with my paintbrush, and I'm going to go over these pencil lines, but as you can see, you can still sort of see through the paint. It's just so that we can give our canvas a lick of paint, and it sort of helps us prime it. So just cover up your whole canvas and make sure you paint the tops and the sides as well. Once you've painted the background of your canvas, you can just give your medium brush a good wash. And while we wait for this to dry, we're now going to move on to mixing up a whole load of colours that we can use for our foliage. So if you are painting this on your card, this is the area that you want to start joining in now, because we're going to create all of those colours, and then we can sort of do a dance between them all while we're doing all of our different leaves. So what we want to do is just start mixing up a few different greeny shades, a few blues, a few sort of brown colours. So to start with, I'm just going to mix up a sort of true green, which is going to be blue and yellow, and just give that a really good mix. What we can then do to this colour, because it's quite dark, which is nice, is we can actually mix it up again, but this time we'll add white to it. So again, I'm just picking up a scoop of yellow, a scoop of blue, and then I'm just going to add a little bit of white and give this a good mix as well. If you want to lighten it up even more, you can just add a tiny little bit more white to it. What we now want to do is mix up a brown shade or a couple of different brown shades. I'm just going to wash off my small brush. And to mix up your brown, what we want to do is we have to start with red and then just add a little bit of black to it and give it a really good mix. And this should give you quite a nice chocolatey brown shade. I always say with this, you can always just add the black gradually just because you have more control over the colour that you're making. Once you're happy with that, we can mix up a lighter shade as well. So for this, I'm going to start with some red. I'm going to add some yellow to it. And then a little bit of black and give that a good mix. Also add a little bit of white to this as well. If you feel like either of your colours are a little bit too red for the undertone, just add that black back in gradually and mix it back in, and it just gives it more of a grey, earthy undertone. As soon as you're happy with the initial colours we've mixed up, we just want to wash off our little brush. So moving over to our canvas or our card, we can now start painting in our different shapes of all of our leaves. So what I'm going to do is just start with this lighter sort of bluey green shade that I created. And for this, I'm just going to draw in the sort of shapes that you would find on olive trees. So for this, it's sort of a little bit like a tadpole shape. So it sort of rounds at the top and then comes in to meet this line. And remember, don't worry too much about this initial line that we've drawn in because it's all going to be covered up with all of our foliage. So what we can start doing is just adding these in, coming off either side of our initial L shape and the shape that we've got up here, just to start building up our first layers of all of our foliage. So just very carefully, just start painting in these shapes. And I would also just not worry about these shapes too much at all. We get all sorts of different shapes and sizes and colours of leaves. So as long as you're just building them up nice and gradually, we're going to be going over all of this anyway. And what's quite nice about this is if there's a leaf that you really hate, we can just cover them up with another one. So don't worry too much about this. Just try and enjoy it. Don't overthink it. Just pop them wherever you feel like you want them to go. As soon as you're happy with that, we can just wash off our small brush and move over to our next colour and our next leaf. So for this next leaf, I'm just going to go for a really standard shape of leaf, which is a little bit like the lemon shape. And I'm actually just going to use this other colour that we made, mixing our blue and our yellow paint together, just because it's a little bit darker. So for this, I'm just picking it up with my small brush. And if you ever feel like you've got too much paint on your brush and you want to eliminate some of it just so you can control what you're doing, I just like to dash the excess paint off on the side of my palette. And it just helps you bring the paintbrush to a nice peak. So whenever you're ready, moving over to your canvas or your card, we're now just going to start doing exactly the same thing, but branching these leaves out on top of the other ones and in between them. Again, just making them meet this sort of area where this initial line that we drew was, just so that they're all coming from the same point. But please don't worry about how they look within this area because we are going to keep building it up and covering them all up. So I'm just going to start with my first one, bringing it from a point, rounding it, having it meet this middle, and then doing the same on the other side. Again, don't worry about these shapes too much. We want them to look nice and natural. And we can always go back in afterwards and give them a second coat of paint if you feel like you need to. So what I would suggest is just filling them all in now, and then we can go back in and sort of neaten them up a little bit if you want to, or make them bigger, or just give them that other coat of paint. So just spend a little moment adding these. Again, try and do different shapes and sizes if you can. So some will be slightly smaller, so I might have one small one coming from the top. Then another bigger one coming down around here. So just take your time, just filling these all in. Sometimes it's nice just to take a little step back from your painting, have a little look at what you have achieved so far, and then if you want to, you can add any more in. Sometimes I quite like just adding a few that aren't even linked to that line that we've created. It almost just floats off from the side because we are going to be filling it all in. And this is your moment, like I mentioned before, if you want to go back in and give them another coat of paint just to make them really opaque and thick, you can do that now. If there are ever any shapes that you think, oh, I just need to, make it a bit longer, a bit wider, or a little bit neater, you can do that now as well. I would also say at this point, don't worry if any of your leaves are sort of flowing off around the side of your canvas or your card, because that kind of works as well. We want it to look really healthy and full. So I wouldn't worry if some of your leaves are reaching the edge. I would just say if they're reaching the edge on one side, maybe do the same on the bottom side as well, just to sort of match it up. I'm now just going to wash off my little brush before we move on to our next set of leaves. So for our next set, I would like to add in some holly, just because this is such a festive plant. So what I'm going to do is just mix up that colour now. So holly is actually quite a bright shade of green. So I'm going to start with this quite bright mid shade of green I've got here. I'm going to add a little bit of white to it and just give it a good mix. And I'm also just going to add a little bit of my darker shade of green to this, and also a tiny bit of blue. So to create our shape for our holly, what I like to do is start with one side and then work on the other side. So I'm going to start here, and essentially all it is a sort of curved like line, a little bit like we were drawing waves. So I'm going to start at the very top, and I'm just going to curve my brush around, creating these wave-like shapes, just making them slightly bigger as we get to our base here. And then you can do exactly the same on the other side. So start from the top, wave it around, just make them slightly bigger and wider as you reach this base here. Again, don't worry about this section too much. We're going to fill it in with some more foliage. And then you can just paint it all in. So once you've got that initial shape in there, you can then amend it slightly. So you might want to make the top bit a little bit more pointy. You might want to work on each of the points a little bit more. And I'm just using the very tip of my paintbrush here to do that. And if ever your holly or whichever leaf you're doing meets your other leaves, don't be afraid to overlap them. We want them to look like it's nice and natural and they're all sitting together on the same bouquet or bunch. So at this stage in our painting, we want to make sure that our leaves are really starting to overlap. So wherever your holly is naturally overlapping some of your other leaves that we previously painted, just give the holly leaves an extra layer of paint just to make them really thick and make them stand out. And this is also your opportunity, if you want to, you can very carefully go back in and sort of make the ends of the holly really spiky. So I'm just using the very, very tip of my paintbrush just to help me sort of create those little spiky like leaves. As soon as you're happy with your holly, we're just going to wash off our little brush again. So we now want to move on to mixing up the colour that we're going to use for our pine leaves, which are the traditional leaves that we have on our Christmas trees. So for this, I'm just going to mix up the colour where I had this first initial dark shade of green. And for this, I'm just going to pick up some yellow paint. Don't worry if it's got any red in it, that's fine, it actually works quite well. And then going to add some blue to this. And then I'm also going to add all of my shades of green. So I'm going to start with my darker shade, my lighter shade, and then my really light shade of green. And if you haven't got all of these shades of green available in your palette, just add a little bit of extra yellow to it. And we're also going to add some white as well to help mix it all in. So I'd mix this in first. And then we're going to add in our white. So we're going to add a small amount of white to this. And now we just want to darken it up slightly. So all I'm going to do is add some more blue to this and also a little bit of black paint. Once you're happy with this, just pick up a scoop of it and add it to a spare bit of your palette. I'm just going to pop it here. And to this section, we're just going to add a little bit of white to it, just to lighten it up. To begin with, we're just going to start with our darker shade. And again, just dash off any of the excess paint on the side of your palette, just so you haven't got too much paint on your brush. And then moving over to our painting, we're just going to start drawing in the very initial shape, which is just a line. So it's almost like the twig or the branch that all of our pine kernels are going to stick out from. So I'm just going to stick with the same direction that I've been going with my painting so far. So here they're sort of sticking up to the top section of the canvas. So I'm just going to draw in a line, starting from that pencil line, and just coming out. If you can, try and make it slightly thinner at the top. Don't worry too much about this though, but if you can, it's quite good practice. And then picking up some more of this paint, what we're going to start doing is starting from the center where we've just drawn that line, is just do little flicks out. Just lifting up your paintbrush, almost a little bit like you're using a chopstick. And as you can see, you start to get this sort of pine-like looking leaf shape just by flicking the paintbrush out onto the canvas. I'm just really using the very, very end of my brush, and it gives it that kind of almost furry like looking effect. If you find that your paint is getting dry at all, just please dip your brush in your water. Don't be afraid to do that. Add a few drops into your paint, really mix it in, and then go back into your painting. It really helps you get a nice fluid texture with your paint. So once you've done your first pine branch or pine leaf, what you can do is then pick up your lighter shade. So what I like to do is just dash off that paint that I had on my brush, pick up the lighter shade, and then just working with this same leaf that we've just done. I like just doing little flecks of this into that leaf, and it just gives it a little pop of highlight. What we can also experiment with is picking up a little bit of white on our paintbrush, having not washed off the previous shade of paint. And while the paint underneath is still wet, we can actually go back in and add little flecks of this in there. And it just gives it that highlight and that extra tone and texture. And it really helps us accentuate these leaves while they're sitting on top of the other ones. So it's almost worth doing a little dance between the three colours. So starting with your darker one and the lighter, adding the white, and then going back in with that darker shade still using those little flick motions with your paintbrush, but you're almost merging the different paint shades in together, and you can just see all the different tones come out. We're just going to bring this right down to the bottom to overlap all of these leaves as well. So again, just starting with my darker shade, just going to add a little bit of water to the mixture and really mix it in. I'm just going to draw the first line, so I'm going to bring it down from about here. It's overlapping that leaf, coming down to about there, and then always starting from this line, I'm just doing little tiny flicks out, just using the very top of my paintbrush. And because I've added that water in there, you can see it goes a little bit more watered down, but this actually does help with the technique and the look that we're after, especially as we're building up all the layers. And then go ahead and pick up some of your lighter shade. Just add little bits of this in there, just overlapping it, and then dashing off some of my excess on the side of my tissue. I'm just going to pick up a small amount of white. Just add this back in. So you can see it sort of coming together. Then go back to my darker shade if I want to, and just add this back in, sort of merging it in with that white. So now I'm going to move on to my next one. And because I've now got this line down here, I'm going to direct this one coming down slightly. Once you're happy with those shapes, what we're going to do now is we're just going to stick with the same technique we've been using for our pine leaves, and we just want to start going over the initial line that we drew in at the start with the pencil. And the idea for this is we just want to start making that area where the leaves meet that line really full and bushy. So what I would suggest doing again is just starting with your darker shade, and I'm just going to start at the top end here. And just following that initial pencil line, I'm going to do little flicks coming out from it, and I'm going to overlap all of the leaves that I meet along the way. I'm then going to do the same on the bottom area as well, just starting from that line, going down. And what we can start to see is it just really building up. So doing it all the way along. And actually what you can start to do is having some of this area be a little bit longer, just to really fill those areas in. And then we're also going to do the same coming down the line that we drew as well. So just again side to side, just overlapping any of the leaves that you meet along the way. And then what you can do is then pick up your medium shade that we did before and just start overlapping this in there. And then again we can also dash off this paint and pick up some of our white and go back in with the white and just start doing tiny gentle flicks side to side, just to give this a little pop and add all of those tones in, especially as it just blends in so nicely with what we've already done underneath. It kind of works quite well. So once you've done one section, so I've just done the top section, I'm now going to move on and do exactly the same thing down here at the bottom. Once you're happy with that, we're just going to wash off our little brush again. And then moving back over to our palette, we're going to start picking up one of the shades that we've just made previously, one of the browns. I think I'm going to stick with the lighter shade. I'm just going to add a couple of drops of water back into it and really mix it up. And all we want to do with this is really dash off most of the paint from our brush. We just want a tiny little bit on there. And adding that water in really helps get a nice fluid texture and consistency. And what we're going to do with this brown is we're just going to start adding little twigs amongst our foliage. So just using the very tip of your brush to do this, because we want it to be nice and thin, we're just going to start doing little jagged squiggly lines in our painting, still coming from that middle section. Might have a few sort of branching out from it. And by adding that water in to that paint like we did to start with, it really helps. Just adding it in, it really thins it out. We don't want it to be too drippy and runny, but we do want it a nice thin consistency, just because it really allows us to get that nice thin effect. So you can just start adding these in wherever you want them. They might be slightly thinner and smaller as you get to the ends of your foliage, just along here. And they might be slightly longer and thicker in this middle section, but just have a little play around. It just adds a pop of colour into our paintings. I think the good thing with this is just not overthinking it, just sort of adding them where you feel like you need to, and just let your hand be quite jaggedy. You don't need to be neat with this. The only thing I would say is just try your best to push really lightly down, just so it helps you get that thin line. As soon as you're happy with your twigs, we're now just going to add a few berries to our painting. So I'm just going to go back to that darker shade that we made, that sort of dark red colour that we made earlier, adding a bit of water back into it. I quite like that it's a maroon shade of brown, but I'm just going to add a little bit more red to it just to brighten up slightly. And I want to go in with this paint and actually be quite thick, so the opposite to what we just did with our twigs. We want to go in with quite a lot of thick paint at the end of our brush, because what we can do with this is just dollop it on so it looks like berries. And you can add this anywhere within your foliage really, but I quite like to add little blobs and dots of this to some of the ends of the twigs. You can even have some sort of coming off so they're not even attached. I think it works quite well. It gives it quite a nice effect. So I'm just really carefully blobbing that paint on to the canvas with that darker shade. And then what we'll do afterwards is we can go in with a more true red, so a brighter red, and add a few of those berries in as well. So don't cover up the whole thing with this shade. Just add a few of them in there. As soon as you're happy with your darker shade of berries, you can then go ahead and add a different shade. So I'm going to go for more of a true red, the red that comes straight out of the tube for this. So again, I'm just picking up quite a lot with the tip of my brush. And I'm just going to go back in and add a few blobs of this within the painting as well. Again, you might have some coming off from the branches, some in the middle of the foliage. Then as a last finishing touch, we can just add a few little dots of white paint just to give it a really big pop of highlight. So I'm just going to wash off all of the red from my brush. Then picking up some pure white paint, I'm just going to do exactly the same thing. I'm just going to add a few little dots of this white within there. So now's your moment to take a little step back and decide if there's anything else you want to add to your painting. So once you've added in all of the details that you wish in your painting, or your cards are nice and dry, you have then completed your Christmas masterpieces. Thank you all so much for joining us, and a very Merry Christmas. Bye!